What's next for Mark Souder?
I always joke that at age 55 I was going to teach. Well, I'm past 55, so I presume somewhere here in the next year I'll probably wind up at one or more. I could teach classes at different places. I've chosen to stay here. Diane and I have been traveling more. We just went out to New England and saw her brother there. I really needed the time with her. I needed the time with my grandkids. And I'm 60, so I view myself as semi-retired. I'm going to go going from 70 hours a week to 0 was a little much. So somewhere in here I'll get a balance. I started into a book. I've talked to a couple of national organizations about working on that. If they're obviously, since I headed the border committee, since I headed the narcotics efforts, co-chaired the National Park Caucus, any kind of commissions related to those things, it would be like Romer and Hamilton. I could do some of that type of thing. It's a little harder to do it from Indiana, but we wanted to stay here. That was our choice. So I'll see how it goes, but those are some of the kinds of things.
You said you went from 70 hours to 0. How big of an adjustment have the last 5 months been?
Well, I'm thankful that I have the maximum amount of ESPN fantasy teams in hockey, basketball, and football. I love numbers. I've always loved baseball. I have 10 teams in each. Fantasy hockey's the toughest because there's more categories and a lot of Russians and Canadians in the leagues I'm in. So, that occupies some of it. I've been on Facebook a lot. I've spent time with Grant and Reagan, even out to Colorado. Diane and I went out there with our son and daughter-in-law there, with our newest grandchild, Elias. So I've spent more time with the grandkids in this period than I would over years. So it fills it, but you need challenges too. And I wanted to give Marlon space during the election cycle, but I've become a little more active. Presume I'll be up a little more on radio. Writing's a natural. I had a graduate scholarship in journalism after I graduated from IPFW to go on to IU, but chose instead to go to Notre Dame MBA. So I've always been interested in journalism. I've always, even when I was a furniture dealer in Grable, did newspaper columns and radio commentary. So we'll see. I'm not sure. I've talked to a couple of education groups because I spent a lot of years in the education committee. One thing a lot of people don't understand is that there's a 1-year tight lobbying restriction after you resign. So my clock started ticking May 18th, where I can't talk to senior staff or members of Congress. So I'm somewhat restricted anyway as far as some of that. Now, I've talked to a few organizations. One flew me into Washington to help them plot some strategy, assuming the Republicans were going to win. And I can work with groups, but they can't tell anybody on the Hill that the ideas were mine right now because of what I believe are good lobbying rules. So it'll evolve, and what the Lord teaches is patience. Sometimes you have to wait upon the Lord. People who are type A people like me tend to charge, and then God tries to do it. I felt that because I wasn't listening well, God slammed me down and said, listen, and so I'm trying to do that.
You mentioned people in the community being very supportive of you. Have you found that to be the case, generally speaking? What is the reaction from people when you are out in the public?
Yeah, I mean, that obviously the people who are not very supportive aren't necessarily going to hunt me down. And I understand that. But, one of the phenomena of listening to the election last night was, generally speaking, 80 to 90,000 people would vote against me in a presidential year, 60,000 in non-presidential. I figured 30,000 people would wake up on election day mainly because they wanted to vote against Mark Souder. They weren't really going in to vote for somebody. They didn't like me. That people who say want to legalize drugs or marijuana viewed me as the enemy. There are lots of abortion, gay rights, TARP. Let's just say I had a lot of adventures when I was in, and I spoke my mind. So when you think of it, if you get offended easily, thinking that 30,000 people are getting up solely to vote against you would make somebody who's a circle who likes to please everybody a little uncomfortable. I'm used to criticism, that 3,000 letters could come in and you go, look, I represent 800, or you could get 3,000 letters, and I represented around 750,000 people. So 3,000 letters, if they're mad, isn't anywhere even near a fraction. So some people are upset, but many have reached out. It is astounding how many people struggle with things in their life. Only Jesus was perfect. But we all try to act perfect, and it's just like if you have a miscarriage as a mom, it's amazing how many friends suddenly come forth and say, we had one too. If you've had a parent die, then people come up and go, my best time to relate to people at funerals was when my dad died suddenly at age 55. All of a sudden, I could talk to people about it because I went through it. And that's been amazing too, and gives you encouragement. And this area has a variety of Christian religions. Fort Wayne has a big mix of the biggest Lutheran school system, multiple Catholic high schools, lots of evangelicals, mainline churches. But what I saw was a commonality of believing that in Christianity, in particular, Judeo-Christianity grounded, we obviously have synagogues and other diversity too, but mostly a Christian district that also believes in forgiveness. And what they wanted to see was their repentance. And while we all struggle, I think that's what they saw, and that's why they've been supportive.